Before we begin today's show, we'd like to take a moment to point you in the direction of our Patreon page, which you can find at patreon.com/indie-by-design. By pledging just a few dollars a month, you're supporting us and helping us dedicate more time to producing the Indie by Design podcast. You're playing a part in pushing forward our plans to improve the quality of the show and increase the number of weekly episodes that we release. And you're getting some great rewards in return, including early access to episodes and the option to become more involved in the show. Whatever the case, our Patreon page is a great way to keep up to date with all the information on our live streams of indie games, newly released video and audio content, and to stay up to date with what we've got planned for the future in regards to existing projects and entirely new ones that we're currently working on. Just go to patreon.com/indie-by-design for more info. Thanks for listening, and on with the show. Welcome everyone to the Indie by Design podcast, the show about great games and their creators. This is episode 12, and we're talking to Variable State's co-founder Jonathan Burroughs about the design, creation and reaction to their 2016 release, Virginia, which recently performed incredibly well at the 2017 BAFTA Games Awards. I'm John Robertson, and I'll be your host for this episode. You can follow Indie by Design to stay up to date with all of our podcasts, books and editorial on games on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube at Indie by Design, or by visiting our website, indiebydesign.net. If you'd like to leave us a review on your preferred podcasting platform, then that would be very much appreciated. Is it a game? Isn't it a game? This is a question that's becoming increasingly popular in discussion about certain games, and has certainly, for better or worse, been the central topic around which a lot of criticism of Variable State's Virginia has revolved. Here we talk to the studio's co-founder Jonathan Burroughs about his reaction to that question, whether it's a meaningful one, what the design goals of Virginia were, and much more over the course of the interview coming up. If you've ever played Virginia, and we recommend that you do, or at least watch some of the playthrough we have on our YouTube channel, you'll know that it's a game that celebrates ambiguity and subjectiveness in storytelling. And it's discussion about these aspects through which we kick off our conversation with Jonathan.
The game started off being, I think it's fair to say in its earliest days, it was almost like a bit of a David Lynch pastiche, but I think veered away from that hope as time went on. But what's very much the case with David Lynch's storytelling is there is that ambiguity and that subjectiveness with what any individual gets from one of his works. He doesn't. It's not clear cut. It's not straightforward what the intent behind a piece is, and that was something we wanted to get in Virginia. That isn't to say that the storytelling would be arbitrary. I think it's right that people look for specific meaning, and there certainly were ideas behind the game and the intent behind the game and its story. But I think it was important to us that it wasn't so straightforward at the end that people could say, "Oh, right, that's definitively what that is," and there'd be a consensus on it. We wanted there to be conversations around it, and it to be up to individual players to get some personal meaning out of it.
So in that sense, then, have you refrained from describing the work? I think there's or sort of your interpretation of the work, whether that's objective or whether that's your own subjective reading into it. I think there's I think it was Picasso that said, he would always, I'm sure he's not the only one, but he would never explain the meaning behind any of his paintings, because to do so would immediately sort of invalidate its value.
Yeah, well, no, I think a few reasons for it. So I think I agree with that completely. I think I can only detract from what people feel about it. Like if it collapses the possibility space of what the meaning of the thing could be. If I give a definitive meaning, then all these wonderful individual interpretations become invalidated. So I wouldn't want to do it for that reason. But also, enough time has passed now, and I was in a very the game was in development for many years, and we as creators were in different mindsets over the course of its development, different reasons for different ideas. Enough time has passed now that I don't think I could completely, with certainty, say what the reasons for some of the decisions made in it were, and also being a product of three creators. Some part of the storytelling is mine, but some parts of it are Lyndon's, some parts of it Terry's, and so I can speak for those two So I suppose that's a convenient way of dodging this. But no, I certainly wouldn't want to try and explain it.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and even though it's a team that work together to create the game, you still see each of you as having your own sort of individual and maybe your own individual impact, and maybe an impact that's you see the work in a different way than the other guys.
You certainly had conversations afterwards, like just to, and one during the making as well, to discuss what we felt like we would describe a scene or an idea or a piece of imagery that one of us wanted to put into the game, and we'd talk around it, and often the reason for including it would be it wouldn't be necessarily that this absolutely services the plot. It might just be that an idea has a nice aesthetic to it, or that it conveys an emotion or something like that. And then after that, seeing it in context in the game, we could talk about, well, how do we interpret that individually? And often my reading of a scene would be different to Lyndon's or Terry's, or the emotional response we get from it would be different. Broadly, we sort of have a quite shared view of the thing, but there are details, like the ending in particular. I think we take quite different views of what happens to the characters and how how optimistic or how bleak we find the story. So that's interesting, I guess.
Yeah, it's sort of like someone, I forget who it was now, but someone described conceptual art to me as the artist, the creator themselves creates, 60, 70, 80% of the circle, and then it's up to the audience to fill in the rest, and that's what creates that kind of everlasting appeal, and that sort of individuality and that connection between the artist and the audience. But it's interesting that it seems on the creator side for you, there's a sort of shared maybe X percentage, but then each of the individual creators can fill in their own part of the circle as well. I'm not sure that sort of, I mean, maybe it does, but I haven't really heard of anyone in games or whatever really speak of the relationship that each of the individual members of the team have with a game in that way before.
I feel very strongly it extends beyond the three of us as writers as well, that it'll be it's like a game is a multimedia work. It's certainly part of that storytelling will be in the visuals and the artwork and the sound design, but I think even in details of the mechanics and the feel of the thing will put the player in a particular mindset, or will have an influence on how they're feeling moment to moment. So I think that every individual has made there's some reflection of them in the finished work, and also, I mean, the way the game is made, it being a long process and a very collaborative and very malleable process, that at some point, relatively early in the game's development, a plan was made for how the story should play out, and then that was iterated on and adapted as the thing became more tangible, and ideas that existed on paper were invalidated or spawned better ideas in the course of making it. So I feel very confident and sort of and like the fact that although perhaps there was at some point a really specific intent, that changed over the course of the making of the thing too. And I think actually even when a project is a creative project is embarked upon with a specific goal in mind, and that's religiously adhered to, I think for various reasons, like maybe even that the creative themselves is, you often hear of someone going in with a particular intent, their work to convey a particular message, but in the finished thing actually doesn't serve that goal at all. People can get deluded, or what exists in your head is impossible to translate into your medium that you're working in. So I feel much more confident thinking of the creative work as standing on its own, separate from its creators once it's been birthed into the into the forum where it's consumed, and then it stands on its own 2 feet.
Yeah. Was it difficult to get that balance between working towards the initial sort of project outline and whatever form that was, and staying malleable to kind of adapt as you go on? Is it difficult to get that balance between, being adaptable, but also, in the end, just actually making something that is finished, because I suppose you could go too far the other way, and you just keep changing it and keep changing it, keep bringing in new ideas and inspirations, and the whole thing gets it's just a never-ending process of kind of adaptation and change.
Oh yeah, I'm sure I've heard enough other creators say echo this statement before, but I think Virginia, as it exists, is it exists in the form it does because there was a point where we had to stop working on it, and we could have there were plenty of things on task lists and things that we talked about that we could have done and would have done in had we had an extra week, there would have been a week's worth of extra work done on it and changes that we had in our minds. But these things, I mean, it's a horrible, it's a often used cliche. I think creators saying work comes to an end. It's never finished. It just comes to an end. I think that applies to Virginia as well. So we were in those last weeks, it felt more than any game I've ever worked on before, much more like the process of editing a film. Because of the way the game is structured, we were making changes to scene lengths and to the specific the quality of cuts, like trying to align cuts with bits of music, or even Linda would go and make minor changes to pieces of music so we could change how a scene would end or how long it would last, and so that contracting and extending the relative lengths of scenes, doing little bits of changes to performance. I guess that isn't really like editing a film at all. I suppose it's stuff being in so much more in service of the feel of the thing and conveying the right emotions to that level of detail. Typically, working on a mechanicsy game, you'll be bug fixing, problem areas, or balancing things for kind of the exhilaration of the game. And whereas we were sort of balancing a particular scene, this doesn't feel poignant enough, or like the drama is lost in this scene because it goes on too long compared to the next scene. Those sorts of decisions were being made.
Yeah. So what was the you're talking about different sort of scenes and sensations that you want to communicate there. Like what was the initial kind of goal? What was the initial inspiration on a thematic level? Was it to provide a certain kind of emotion or sensation to the player, or was the original inspiration a certain specific set of plot points that you wanted to tell, or were those things kind of always they were never one or the other, they were always a cohesive presence in your mind?
I think some of the things that I feel most characterised Virginia now certainly came much later. I think the earliest conversations about the shape it should take were quite practical. So the need for the desire for there to be two characters, which would help from a sort of functional perspective, useful for the storytelling, that there would be detectives, and so that would allow them access to. It would give you a reason to be going to the places that you do, having access to locations, or I'm trying to describe it. If you're a detective, you can turn up at somebody's house uninvited and enter into their lives in a way that you can't if you're a character in a different role. So so a lot of it was just this would be useful to open up the possibilities of the story. And then as time went on, things like the specific relationship between the two main characters. I think in our earliest conversations we envisaged that being a romantic relationship, and then as time went on, we thought no, it would actually be what's done less in storytelling. I think it's fair to say in sort of film and video game storytelling, a story is just about a friendship, and there's just as much drama in a friendship as there is in a more intimate relationship. So we veered towards that, and just over time, the details got added in, and when you make I'm trying to think of the right analogy, but you get to a place where once you've got a rough shape of a thing, as you start to add detail into one part, that has repercussions for decisions you made in other parts, and you're sort of always shifting around. This very everything becomes interconnected very quickly, and so that became the process after a light on certain ideas that myself, Terry, and then would excite us more than other ideas, and focus attention on those, and that's really how it evolved. It was very vague, and that's a vague answer to your question. So
it's all right. It's a strange and confounding game. I'm expecting strange and confounding answers. Yeah. So you guys on the writing side there, was it a case of that? Was it like riffing off of each other? Was it, meetings and chats and loads of ideas were kind of coming up all over the place, or was it sort of more sedate and considered than that?
So we started working on the game, I think it was in January 2014. Myself and Terry got together and decided we were going to make something ourselves. And then very early on, I think we spent a couple of months dithering, pursuing ideas that were too ambitious, and then reigned things in a little bit. And then we played 30 Flights of Loving, which became this very, which really crystallized things, and we knew we wanted to pursue that game's approach to using film editing as part of an interactive experience. And so that's when we knew the approach we were going to take, and then very quickly we realized, music's going to be very important to conveying the drama and the emotion of the scenes in the absence of dialogue. So Lyndon came onto the project, and then I think up until sort of our immediate objective was getting a prototype together that we could we could do something with. I don't think we sort of considered, maybe we'll kickstart something, or we'll put it in front of publishers, or we'll do something. We'll at the very least we'll take it to trade shows. And we took it to EGX that year, the Eurogamer trade show. And then, but at that point, really all we had were a collection of nice scenes that we liked, and we didn't really have much of a vision. Like there was this little demo that lasted for about 15 minutes, and it was very open-ended and didn't reach any sort of conclusion, but sort of set the stage for what the tone would be and who the characters were. And then I think took almost I think that was in September that year. I seem to remember it was just October, November, December that year. It was almost daily meetings, just over Skype. Like I live in London. Lyndon, I think, lives in London as well, but in a completely different part. Terry lives in Dublin in Ireland. So we've always worked remotely, but just having daily meetings over Skype. And it was really slow work. We'd talk about a scene or a little character arc or something like that we were interested in, and then all go away and think how to expand it, or think of things inspired by that and come back together and talk about it further. And then slowly, we ended up with this big Excel spreadsheet full of all the scenes in the game, all of the detail that we would be able to translate into the interactive version.
Was it always a process of agreement, or did different people have different ideas? I mean, I'm sure there were on a detail level, but like drastically different ideas as to where the narrative might or should go, or how it's presented.
There were certainly differences of opinion. That said, we're tremendously lucky that the three of us just seem to. We're definitely drawing from. We have some interest in film and TV and music and such, so we're often drawing from the same pool of inspirations. And if not, then the kind of things that one of us will suggest the others might like to look at as a source of inspiration. Our tastes are fairly similar, so it's always that side of things is always very enjoyable and very painless. But I think inevitably, even if we're working on a thing which we've described to each other in some detail, while it's in the abstract, while it just exists as words on a page, each of us is carrying a very different mental image of what that is, or is extrapolating that out to a place different to what each of us are. And so a lot of the disagreements would be, we'd come back and someone would just, over a weekend, say somebody got very passionately taken an idea down a particular route and they got very invested in it, but the other two wouldn't be so invested in that. I don't know how we reconcile that stuff. It was a really exhausting process, actually. Like just mentally exhausting. Like you'd talk for an hour, and then we would have to not talk for a little while, and then come back together, because otherwise we'd have got sick of each other. But I'd never done anything like that before. I suppose that's equivalent to the kind of experience like writers in a writer's room on a TV show must have. It's not something I've ever done. Even when I've written for games before, it's tended to be quite a solitary thing. So that collaborative writing experience was was really new, but really good. Like that's definitely, if we do another game in the Virginia style or anything that's got a story focus, I'd love to take that approach again. I think it's really good.
Yeah. And I mean, you've mentioned film a few times and TV just there, and I don't want to sort of dwell on that idea of that question of whether it is or games of this type are games at all. But I'm curious about the film and TV kind of comparison, in that why it was that you chose to go down the game route with this idea. I suppose, I mean, were there any doubts about whether it would work in a game, or what the audience reaction might be to this sort of form of narrative?
So I think I can say something. It was always going to be a game that I made. I've only ever worked in this game, so I worked in studio game development for about 10 years prior to setting up Variable State, doing the indie thing. So I wouldn't be able to make anything in another medium. I know nothing about the process of making a film, for example. But I think so playing 30 Fights of Loving gave us an awful lot of confidence that this approach could work, and then we knew we saw that there were opportunities to do interesting and imaginative cuts and to use that approach to tell a story which wasn't the unbroken real time of most video game storytelling, where you're with the main character every step of the way, going on a continuous journey. That we could jump between time frames, we could jump between locations, only stay in scenes as long as was necessary for the drama. So we knew the approach could work, and we could embellish that with character animation, character performance, and other interactions as well. But we were, I think, and I think actually, in hindsight, I think we just didn't care all that much if there was or wasn't an audience for it, which seems really reckless, actually, in terms of the sustainability of a studio, like thinking of things as a business. But we didn't. I think we had a lot of confidence that there would be an audience out there, because we were coming right off the back of, so that was early 2014. In 2013, I think, had Gone Home just come out, and I think it was probably the case in Kentucky Route Zero, and obviously prior to that, games like Dear Esther had done very well, and I think Everybody's Gone to the Rapture had already been announced, and there was we had a real confidence, I think, that there were these experimental, mechanics light, story led games out there already that were finding an audience, and we felt that we could add something to that movement, or to that what was going on there, and it would be sufficiently differentiated from those that it would be a meaningful offering. It wouldn't just be a longer 30 Fights of Loving. We knew we'd be able to do things that were different, even if it was just a different story. That would be meaningful enough, but we felt we could do a little bit more than that as well.
We hope you're enjoying the show so far, and if you're motivated to delve deeper into game design and game designers, then do make sure you check out Independent by Design, Art and Stories of Indie Game Creation. It's a hardback book combining inside stories focused on specific studios and individuals, informed by tens of hours of original interviews and compelling pages of original artwork and concept documents. 26 studios are including Chinese Room, Introversion, Devolver Digital, Frictional Games, and more. Go to indiebydesign.net to get your copy today. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Indie by Design, and our website, as well as being a portal through which to listen to this podcast and buy our book, is full of interesting editorial content for you to read. Again, that's at indiebydesign.net. We'd also like to remind you of our Patreon, which is patreon.com/indiebydesign. We really are dedicated to keeping the show going, improving its quality, and increasing the number of weekly episodes. We also really want to keep it free of any sort of advertising. Your support can make that happen. In return, our patrons receive regular additional and exclusive content, the option to get more involved in our community, and much more. Just go to patreon.com/indiebydesign. We begin the second half of our show with Jonathan Burroughs explaining the logistics of getting Virginia made and the relationship that Variable State built with publisher 505 Games to help make that happen.
It's scary embarking on a game anyway, as well as all the other parts of setting up a business and hiring people and things like that. And so often I think we were just distracted by the practicalities of that and weren't thinking about things much beyond the making of our first game. But and every credit to 505 as well. Like I've worked in studios I've worked at in the past. I've worked for hire companies.
Sure.
Whose business has been pitching to publishers and doing games with a close relationship with a publisher who come in and see how you're getting on. And I've worked on projects where the publishers have exerted a lot of creative influence on a project, and that wasn't the case with 505. We were sort of expecting that it might be, and then it didn't turn out to be at all. They really gave us incredible creative latitude, which is very admirable. So it's for good or for ill. It's definitely our game. It's our what we. I was going to say it's our vision, because I don't think that's quite right. Because I don't think it was definitely this malleable production where it isn't what ended up isn't what we had in our mind's eye back at the start of 2014. But it's definitely, obviously, it's not been shoehorned to fit a particular commercial goal.
Yeah. I wonder if it's one of those instances in which, video games have changed so much over the years, and I wonder if you think Virginia and other games that you've mentioned there, like Gone Home and 30 Flights and those sort of things, whether these are examples of things where the term game is maybe brings a connotation to it that isn't accurate, because there's nothing to win or lose, which sets up, which is what you think about when you say game, like there's some sort of competition happening there.
Yeah, but I see it the other way around. I think it's the understanding of what the term game means has changed. I would imagine to a lot of people, to ask them what a game is, their thoughts would alight first on video games before sports or traditional board games or anything like that. And I think it's just this is a relatively recent phenomenon. The kind of video games that the category that I guess the kind that Virginia sits amongst. But I think we've already expanded our understanding of what a game is to mean more than just competition. Like a lot of single player games aren't really about competing with anything. They're much more like something like Uncharted, although there are notionally failure conditions, and it's about winning something. I think the creative emphasis of those games is much more on telling a story, and so I think that's like when we think of the phone these days, it's not purely it's a portable computer more than it's a sound-based telecommunications device. I think a game these days just really means anything from sport to interactive art. I think it's just that the term has become much looser and broader.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I don't want to get too... I am going to get caught up in it, but I don't want to get too caught up in sort of terminology. But I'm also curious to hear what you make of the term walking simulator. Do you think that's... you might not even have an opinion on it. I mean, do you think the sort of the... the question is, how far do you think specifying labels is a useful enterprise? And I mean on a sort of creation level. I fully understand it on a press level or a sort of a communicating to an audience to determine their expectation. But I mean on a creator level, is it useful to think about what you're creating within that sense of that label in order to sort of galvanize and constrain and focus what you're making? I mean, do you look at it in that way?
Yeah, so I think it's a few things to that. So regarding walking simulator, I mean, it's undeniably a silly term that was that was formulated originally to be disparaging towards
Yeah.
kind of games that were light on mechanics, but it seems to have been appropriated by people that make those games, and it's a term that it's not going to go away. So I think it's pointless to fight it. Like, obviously, it's fairly prominent on Steam and things like that these days. So I think it's fine to live with the silliness of it. And as for genre labels in general, I mean, I guess like this is definitely a conversation as a teenager. I recall coming up around music, and it must be a conversation that's existed in literature and prior to that for years before, like how useful genre distinctions are versus how prohibitive they are. I think they're unavoidable because I think people need to categorize stuff. As an audience member, it's useful to categorize stuff so you know you're going after a particular thing. As a creator, I guess it is actually kind of useful because you can decide to what extent you're going to work within the constraints of genre, or you're going to subvert the genre that you see yourself working within, or if you choose to ignore genre entirely. So I think I think it's pointless to say we should ignore it or to try and remove those labels because they have a value, and there are other things at work to keep them there and reinforce them. And for people, I think people instinctively try to reduce in describing something big and complicated like a work of art, you want to try and reduce things down just so that you have a shorthand for describing them to other people. So I've sort of wandered off topic a bit here, but yeah. So I think it's pointless to try and be to reject them too strongly. I think as a creator, it's just it's a creative choice, like how you use them. Do you want to make a genre piece? Do you want to try and defy them or not? But I don't know. Does that answer the question? Does that?
Yeah. No. No. Well, no. It's certainly an interesting response. Anyway, so I suppose, At what end of the scale were you maybe looking towards? Were you trying to subvert the walking simulator sort of ideal, or were you very much kind of always grounded within its accepted sort of construction and presentation to players?
I certainly don't think we were thinking of things in those terms. I don't think we were really using the phrase walking simulator much during the development. So I remember actually in 2014, I think there was someone, I think it was Adam Smith from Rock Paper Shotgun we did an interview with, and he maybe asked us what is the game a walking simulator. I think that was the first time we'd sort of considered it in much and I think we said yes. Like it seemed fine to call it that, but I don't think we were ever thinking about things in those terms making it. I think it was more we had seen with games like Gone Home and others, and what was happening when you took away a lot of the mechanics is that you weren't getting a lesser experience. You, in fact, was heightening some of the storytelling, or in a meaningful and interesting way. That where a game where say first-person story-led game, which has that's very mechanics-led and has very specific ways with which the player can engage with the world that they inhabit. So as like a common example would be a shooting game. Then that informs the kind of story that you're going to tell. You're going to tell a story about a soldier or a murderer or a killer of some kind. And if you take that away, then actually it can become you can be much. It actually liberates you in terms of the kind of stories you can tell, and certainly in terms of the kind of emotional experiences I think you can elicit from players. I think mechanicsy games can often just be about exhilaration and gratification and the thrill of the moment, and whereas Gone Home was touching upon very different feelings. Sort of powerfully nostalgic at times. There's the sense of the sort of the dread that fills that game, and others besides. I'm just talking about my own. I don't want to say that's categorically what that game elicits. But those were what I got from it, And that's what we wanted to try and achieve with Virginia. I think that we were excited to see, particularly with character performance thrown into the mix as well, whereas Gone Home's a very solitary experience. We were seeing, what if we put other characters in there as well? What could we do with that?
Yeah. The performance is interesting because obviously it's a silent game in the sense that there's no spoken dialogue. When at what point did you decide that was the angle that you were going to take, and why did you come to that decision?
So it was relatively early on we decided that we weren't going to do speech, and it was entirely because we were too scared to,
right?
Because we knew the work that would be involved. So at all levels, so we knew that there would have to be. We were cautious of dialogue writing. We weren't completely convinced that'd be a strength of ours. So I suppose we knew to get a really good quality of in-game dialogue, it would rest on a whole load of things that would all have to be to quality. So we'd have to write good dialogue. We would have to cast the right people, get good performances from them, and then have to come up with a system for interacting with characters, having conversations with them that wouldn't get in the way of the kind of game that we saw Virginia being, which would be this quite quick, something moving at kind of a film pace. That's a ridiculous phrase because films move at different paces, but I guess we knew that we'd be cutting between scenes quite regularly, and that would dictate a certain tempo to the game, and we could see, I think, in our mind's eye that the coming and doing something, say, in the kind of traditional RPG way, where you go up to a character, interact with them, and then you're in like a multiple choice dialogue system, that might not work. That's where our thoughts were. I mean, this kind of reveals actually a lack of imagination on our part. The fact that we didn't. I think more what it was that we saw there was a need to prototype to figure out how that would work. And when looking at all the things that we would have to do well, the character animation, the editing, and getting the editing to work with the music, those I think we saw as the highest priorities. And so we kind of just made a decision early on. Well, let's not do dialogue. And as the game went on, it was an incredibly useful creative constraint. Like it was great constraints on the writing, and then later on, actually, we knew from the start we had this ambition for the game to be ultimately very open to interpretation, and that the elimination of dialogue completely served that goal. Although it wasn't the reason that we did it. I'm glad at the end of the project, I was glad that we had done it, because I think it allowed you to project so much more onto the characters, or to try and interpret what was being left unsaid by the characters. And I think that I was really pleased with that. Yeah. I like. I've always been a fan of works, and I suppose David Lynch falls into this category, but I'm more thinking of people kind of like writers like Kurt Vonnegut or Gabriel Marquez and people like that, where they leave like a lot of gaps in the writing in a positive sense, in that it allows your mind the space to kind of interact with the work that bit more and create that sort of sense of feeling within the world, like the author is actively working to pull you in by leaving doors open for you to enter. Are you kind of inspired by that kind of writing in a general sense, or it might not be writing? It could be poetry or music or film or anything that leaves that kind of those spaces that for I don't want to be derogatory, but some people might consider that there's a lack of content here, but actually that's not the case at all. No, I think that's really interesting. I can't actually say that. I think you've articulated something with great clarity there, but I don't think I've necessarily assembled my thoughts in that way before. But I definitely see that the value of that as from a cinematic perspective, the gaps you leave between scenes as you choose to cut from one to the next. In its most basic form, from a continuity editing point of view, that's done for brevity, where you don't need to show the character taking a very long journey, but it can be done for the purposes of meaning, of course, and montage techniques in Soviet filmmaking being the origins of that, and how actually the removal of information forces the viewer to create the imagery in their mind, or to pause and think what what the meaning is there. And of course, you're completely right. That's absolutely the case in literature and other mediums as well. So I think probably we were all aware of that from a filmmaking perspective, and that's what we talked about the most in terms of how we would translate or we would achieve the equivalent in a game. But you're right. I think that I don't know to what degree I'm drawn to specific stories with that for that particular reason. But sort of retroactively, it seems to make sense. That's probably something that makes works particularly fascinating, is where there is that, as you described it, as interaction. I think that's completely true. When you're reading a novel, it is an interactive experience because there's a process of translation going. You're having to turn the words into images in your mind and so on.
Yeah. Well, it's always a pet peeve of mine a little bit when, because I studied film at university, and it's always a little bit of a pet peeve when you sort of get these descriptions of film as a passive medium and games as an interactive medium. Okay, yeah, on a physical level that might be true, but I think on a deeper level that's not at all true. And yeah, the Soviet filmmaking reference there, I mean, like Battleship Potemkin, I suppose, would be like a sort of an obvious sort of film for those early editing techniques, but in the sense in which Virginia's edited, in that you're moving and then suddenly the scene cuts, or you're looking into the mirror and then you open it and you close it, and then there's been a cut there that's invisible, but then you suddenly become aware of it as she's changed clothes. There's not very many games that really edit in that way without taking control away from the player. I mean, it's normally done from a cutscene or through a loading screen or whatever it was. Was there a sense that you were kind of treading largely uncharted ground there? Were you, I suppose, was there a lack of kind of reference points for you to look at?
Yes, so it was why we were so impressed by 30 Flights of Loving around March 2014, Ben Chung's game, because it was such an elegant device, like that he had device. This is a technique that I think anyone that's watched film or television is at least subconsciously aware of. This is the vocabulary of film. The storytelling doesn't take place in a single unbroken take. The camera snaps around and there are these gulfs in time and space, and you just accept it and it's fine. It's not jarring at all. But then it's not done in games. But what is done in games, and I think what is done in most, like if you've worked on a first or third person action adventure game as a designer or developer, in the course of making one of those, debugging the levels and so on, you're often teleporting yourself around levels and so on, just all the time, just in order to skip through sections in order to try and solve a problem or something. And having done that myself, I've never once done that, and my thought equated that to the process of film editing. The two have always been completely separate. Brendan Chung obviously must have done that at some point and saw, oh no, these two things are completely analogous, and then created an experience which made that plain and clear. And I thought that was just so, it was really inspired, like in its elegance, that the technology was all there. He didn't have to invent a new engine or anything to make this happen. He just applied something that people have been doing for decades and use it as a storytelling device. But that was our only touchstone, really, for that approach being done in an interactive way. Like, as you say, like you see film editing often enough in cutscenes, even in first-person cutscenes in games. But you're right, control tends to be completely taken away at that point. So to see it done live, as was done in 30 Flights of Loving, was spectacular. And then that game only being 10 or 15 minutes long, and there being only an opportunity for so many cuts, and like where films are made today, which have imaginative edits and transitions between scenes that have never been seen before. It felt to us, if we go and make our own hour and a half version of 30 Flights of Loving, we will inevitably be doing cuts and storytelling that will be fresh and original to some degree. Fresh and original, even if I know our story is greatly inspired by other works that have preceded it, but it'll be original just because it's distilled through the minds of the particular individuals working on it. We'll put our own slant on it.
For more on games and game creators, visit indiebydesign.net and follow us across our social media channels at Indie by Design. The Indie by Design podcast is brought to you from the writers and creators of Independent by Design, art and stories of indie game creation. Each episode is released on Wednesdays, with our patrons getting the option to receive early access. Music is kindly provided by Ben Prunty.